Hi, I'm Corey Deacon from Nirvana Naturopathic Medicine. I'm here to discuss the similarities and the differences between something called Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome, or CIRS, and Lyme disease. Hi, I'm Corey Deacon from Nirvana Naturopathic Medicine. Lyme disease is becoming more well known nowadays. We used to think that there was kind of only such thing as acute Lyme, where people were, bitten by a tick. They were transferred the infection that causes Lyme, called Borrelia burgdorferi, and that Lyme would then cause symptoms. The initial symptom being a bullseye rash called erythema migrans, and symptoms of fatigue, joint pain, muscle pain, brain fog, cognitive difficulties, and sometimes other issues like numbness and tingling. What we've come to learn about Lyme is that it's not that simple. For example, 20% of people will not even show a bullseye rash after a tick bite, and there's a misnomer that if you don't have a bullseye rash, you don't have Lyme. That's not true. We know now with substantial amounts of research that this is not the case. The other issue is people can actually develop Lyme from tick bites and other insect bites and not even know that they were bitten. And this becomes a problem if they don't develop rash and they don't develop immediate symptoms, because usually testing is not done. This can carry on for years and years, and all of a sudden something happens, like a stressful event, a head injury, some other immune issue, and all of a sudden symptoms start happening, and this is the reactivation of the infection. Now at this point, it's really difficult to diagnose with basic testing. So typically the public health services that test antibodies to Lyme, if they take too long to test them, they actually won't show up as positive, and this is something called a false negative result. So when people develop chronic Lyme, there's a special set of labs that need to be done, even so diligently as doing an MRI to see volumetric changes in an MRI is sometimes needed to actually confirm the diagnosis. There are a lot of other tests available outside of antibody testing, like T-cell testing, like something that we call PCR testing. And the newest kid on the block that in my opinion is the platinum standard now, and you will see this roll out in the next 10 to 20 years, is gene expression testing. It's taking the RNA that is being produced from DNA, and so we can actually look at the behavior of white blood cells through what we call epigenetic expression, and we can tell if the white blood cells are behaving due to an infection with Lyme. Chronic Inflammatory Response Syndrome is a little different. This is a syndrome where we'll produce inflammation that we can no longer regulate appropriately. When you go into a chronic inflammatory response syndrome, you can't shut inflammation off, and the symptoms and similarities between chronic Lyme disease and CIRS are almost perfectly overlapping. So it's actually impossible to tell the difference between the two without looking at proper testing. In the Lyme situation, I talked about why testing sometimes comes up as a false negative. There are also 46 other co-infections that look very similar to Lyme. These are fungal, viral, bacterial, and parasitic and protozoans that can mimic a lot of symptoms of Lyme. So in a lot of cases, you could be negative for Lyme, but positive for these other infections. Now, the other interesting thing is Lyme is actually a causative factor of CIRS. So this chronic inflammatory response syndrome can actually be induced by Lyme. So in some cases, people actually get the Lyme disease treated. They may do natural or pharmaceutical versions of treatment, and we're pretty confident that it's successfully treated, yet a lot of symptoms will continue. And this is because of something called Post-Lyme syndrome. And this Post-Lyme syndrome is, again, this cascade of inflammation that is not shutting off properly. It can cause fatigue, it can cause headaches, weakness, light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, memory problems, particularly with word retrieval, brain fog, focus issues. It can cause disorientation and dizziness, difficulties warming up, so feeling cold extremities, numbness, tingling, sleep issues, dopamine and serotonin problems, so people can develop anxiety as well as depression. Not everybody will exhibit all of those symptoms, but there are 37 documented symptoms for CIRS. The easiest way to tell if you have CIRS rather than Lyme, or if you had Lyme-inducing CIRS, is to look at testing. So there's specialized immune testing that can be done. It's also really important to look at genetic susceptibilities, because 24% of the population has a susceptibility genetically where they'll be more susceptible to the triggering of the CIRS response from Lyme. Other tests that can be done are the genetic expression test. That allows you to see if the epigenetic expression of the white blood cells is due to CIRS and not due to active Lyme. I also highly recommend doing T-cell testing, antibody testing, complement testing, and the gene expression testing to see if somebody has Lyme. You can also do a quantitative MRI for the diagnosis of Lyme versus CIRS, which basically is a specialized MRI technique where there's more cuts that are taken through the brain to give you more data points, and that can actually be put into a computer, and we can look at enlargement and what we call atrophy, or the shrinking of certain areas of the brain that are more of a fingerprint to point towards either Lyme or towards CIRS. If you found this video helpful, I strongly encourage you to share it so that people can get this information. Thanks.